Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our 30-second presentation of the Imagine Austin Speaker Series. My name is Kathleen Fox. I'm with the Planning and Zoning Department. I'm the project lead of the Imagine Austin Speaker Series. As I said, this is our 32nd event since 2012. Today's event is sponsored by the City of Austin's Neighborhood Planning and Zoning Department, and the one who came to me was neighborhood housing and community development. The Imagine Austin Speaker Series is at its core the opportunity to promote and implement the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan, the City of Austin's visioning document for the future through mutual learning and shared dialogue. In the past 5 years, we've invited various thought leaders from all over the United States to talk on a variety of topics, including land use, mobility, affordability, housing, sustainability, water resources, the built and natural environment, public health, culture and creativity, and social equity. Our format this evening is our speaker, Karen Chapple. She's going to speak for 45 minutes to an hour, and after she's done, we will accept questions, and I'll be running around and with the microphone, which I don't think is working very well, unfortunately, and then we'll take your questions. And without further ado, here's Erica Leek from Neighborhood Housing and Community Development, who's going to tell a little bit about what she does in her department and why we're having this series. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see a crowd of people who are obviously interested in issues of affordability. Obviously, the City of Austin has changed a lot in the last many years, but especially it seems in the last decade or so. And as we have seen, City Council has taken an interest in this issue both through adoption of the city's first strategic housing blueprint, which set affordable housing goals for the city, also through the creation of an anti-displacement task force that has been meeting since last December and will be making recommendations related to how to minimize displacement basically in the fall. And so when we were thinking about what speakers we might want to invite to be part of the Imagine Austin Speaker Series to address affordability, Karen Chapple from the University of California, Berkeley came to mind because she and her research project called the Urban Displacement Project, they have been doing analysis about what really works in trying to minimize displacement in cities. So she's going to be sharing some of her research with us tonight. And we look forward to your questions and the discussion that ensues following her presentation. So thank you, Karen, for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah. Great. And the PowerPoint.
And do you have the clicker?
Yep.
And
Is this one working? Is this one better? Is this one better? Okay, we're going to use this one.
somehow this has gone to sleep.
Okay, we'll
This one's working better.
They're going to try and find the PowerPoint somewhere in this room. Meanwhile, I'd just like to say thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really embarrassed to confess this is my first visit to Austin, despite my significant number of years that I've lived on this earth. So I promise to make amends for my ways. I've fallen completely and totally in love with your city, and I'm going to try and come as much as possible for the rest of my life. So it's just a really, really fascinating. I call this, I've given this presentation in several different contexts, and increasingly, I've realized that the major impact of our work in the San Francisco Bay Area on gentrification and displacement has been to use data to move policy, to change policy in cities and regions and even states. And so I'd like to talk a bit about this use of data to really spark a conversation. And this is not irrelevant to the case of Austin, because Austin has its own gentrification study, which is about to come out. And the author's right here, Professor Jake Wegman from UT Austin, who just so happens to be one of my favorite former students. So, where we're going to go with this is I'm going to talk about San Francisco and talk about the data and the policies that we've been talking about in San Francisco. But then I think we need to really shift the lens to Austin, and I hope in the Q&A we can really dig into what we ought to do in your wonderful city. So this is just an overview of our project as seen on social media. So this is a new age for research, and really for research to make a difference. You don't just publish in academic journals anymore. You do a website, you do a Twitter feed, you do a Facebook page. So we try and keep these out there and up to date, and it's really gotten us a national and international recognition. But we started our work from the Bay Area, from actually thinking about regional planning, and a subject which I've written about a fair amount. And in California, there's a regional planning law at the state level, which actually requires metropolitan regions to plan for the people who are going to come. So in the Bay Area, we're talking about 2 million new residents, 1 million new jobs between 2015 and 2040, roughly. So that's a lot of new people. And we want to do it smartly, because we're mandated by the state to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So we've got to get people into denser areas so that they can walk and bike and scoot and take transit more. So that's the only way it's going to work, to have that many people. And otherwise, we're going to absorb all of our beautiful green space on the outskirts of the region and drive and pollute. So how do we do this is the question, and not displace the existing residents. And this is a young resident of a housing complex right near Silicon Valley, where the landlord evicted all of the tenants and replaced them with tech workers from Silicon Valley. And so it's interesting parallels, right? Because Austin and the Bay Area are the two top tech economies of the country. So this is a story we've seen as we try and densify. We put pressure on land prices, and when land prices go up, land values go up, rents go up as a result, and so we see a lot of evictions happening and displacement. So we did a study over a number of years. We were funded by the state agencies, Air Resources Board and Caltrans, both very interested in again, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but making sure that the existing residents can stay. So we worked with a number of community-based organizations in the process of doing this research. And that was for a few reasons. One is that you don't really know what's happening out there on the ground until you go and talk to people. So we used our relationships with community-based organizations to inform how we design the research. So you kind of use them as a springboard. And then we worked with the community-based organizations again when we had our preliminary analysis. And we went back and we said, is this right? And then they told us, no, this is wrong. Or they said, yeah, you got it. And so, this is the sort of research that I like to do, which I call ground truth. And I think it's really important because in the end, all of these community groups bought into our research because they were part of it. Now, this is just all the types of data that we had to use for the study. And again, to really understand neighborhood change, housing policy, the role of amenities, and so forth. We had to gather a lot of different data and put into our database. Now we started by thinking about what had been said before, and there were some important, we felt, omissions in the research that had come before us. And we really wanted to change the way we talked about gentrification and displacement. And so our starting point was that we wanted to address the lack of distinction out there, both in research and in the real world, in the media, between gentrification and displacement. Because the terms have become so blurred together, nobody really knows what either one means. And more than that, the gentrification is complex, and we define it as an influx of capital investment, so real estate, people investing in real estate, and an influx of higher income, higher educated residents. That's gentrification at its core. Displacement, on the other hand, is when households are forced to move from their housing. Now, this can coincide with gentrification, but sometimes it comes before the gentrification, like in the case of urban renewal or other processes where people are forced to leave a neighborhood before it's redeveloped or gentrified. There's also gentrification without displacement, and sometimes that happens because people choose to stay in the area and they choose to pay a lot more rent in order to stay. Sometimes that happens because there's anti-displacement policies at the city level or the state level, which are keeping people in their communities. So there's not a necessary relationship between gentrification and displacement. It's complicated, and in the political world, it's even more complicated because for some people, gentrification is good. It's bringing investment, new stores, healthy food into neighborhoods, and that's a good thing. That's revitalization. For others, it's a bad thing. They're losing their culture, they're losing their community, and they might even be displaced. So it's complicated. In displacement, there's no winners, right? We all lose when there's displacement. So it's much easier to talk about in a public forum. And so we not just the displaced people lose, you know, the school system loses because the students are unstable and moving around and school outcomes go down. Hospitals lose because there's health impacts of displacement, which make it hard for people to, which bring stress out people and increase unhealthy outcomes. There are, there's negative community outcomes of displacement too, in terms of social capital. So all these things made us think, in our research, we're going to talk about gentrification over here and displacement over here. So you'll see how we do that. And just briefly, there's the research out there that has come before us has been pretty messy about thinking about what are the causes of gentrification. We don't really understand it. We haven't really been able to predict it very well. And we haven't really been able to figure out what that relationship is between gentrification and displacement, all the economists that have looked at it, for a variety of reasons, which I'm not going to go into right now. So I'm going to go through a number of different displacement and gentrification indicators that we have used to talk about our region. So the first one is a simple displacement indicator, which is how many low-income households have your neighborhood lost. So if you have lost low-income households, some sort of displacement must be going on, given that, in general, census tracts are actually gaining low-income households. Why? Because we have an increase at the national level in income inequality that is going on in most regions, especially high-tech regions like Austin, like the Bay Area. And so we have a huge growth of low-income households happening at the same time as the growth of the super rich, the 1%, the high income. So if you're losing low-income households in your neighborhood, you're bucking the trend, something must be going on there. So that's our first kind of displacement we talk about, and you can see those are the tracts in red in the picture, and a lot of them in the central areas of the region, and some even in the suburbs. Our second indicator is the loss of naturally occurring affordable housing. So this is the housing that the market has traditionally provided. Most of our affordable housing doesn't come from the government, it comes from the market. And it's come through filtering processes. So houses, as they get older, they decline in quality and then they decline in price. And a house occupied by a high-income family can eventually house a low-income family over time. That filtering down process has actually been disrupted in many areas, so that, and this is what I've seen walking around East Austin in the last 24 hours, that these are housing units that in the traditional market theory should have trickled down to low-income households, and instead they're filtering up, they're trickling up in this disrupted filtering process. And we've lost a lot of units. Our calculations are 100,000 or so, maybe even more, lost in this way in the Bay Area. I'm sure you've lost tens of thousands of units like this in Austin. A third indicator we look at is just exclusion. And so we look at where people can move in the region. Where are the low-income households moving? And the darker blue is where the low-income folks are moving. And in this map, you can see the darker blue is, for the most part, in the external parts of the region, the exurban parts of the region. And in the core of the region this is San Francisco, in Oakland, just to orient you. There's some people that are moving in there as well. But there are great swaths of neighborhoods where no low-income household can actually move at this point. A fourth indicator we look at is gentrification. So again, I defined this before. This is the increase in real estate values, prices or rents, and an influx of high-income, high-educated households. And these are the gentrifying tracts in the Bay Area. It's about 10% of all tracts. And we also look at development as another indicator of the market. And so here you can see private market development in blue. The census tracts in blue are the ones that have had significant, meaning over 100 market rate units built. And as you can see, there's not many tracts in blue. So what's going on here? In the Bay Area, we're having a hard time getting anything built anywhere. We have a big problem in terms of housing supply. The red tracts are those that have subsidized development, and we've actually done just as well in subsidized development, almost as market rate in some communities. But in general, there is not enough development to meet demand. And we'll come back to that point later. Okay, so here is our typology, which you can see online. And just to orient you, we think about both gentrification, and that's the purple neighborhoods, and a lot of them are downtown, so areas, the Mission District, a lot of historically Latino communities in San Francisco have been gentrifying. So the low income are that have gentrified are the purple. The darker they are, the more they have gentrified. And the orange tracks are the high-income places, or the moderate to high-income places. And those are the ones that are excluding the low-income households. So we have, on the one hand, we have displacement going on from the low-income areas, and then on the other hand, from the higher income neighborhoods, we have exclusion. And so we have these dual processes just tormenting and distorting the housing market in the region. And again, this is sort of a close-up on San Francisco and our typology. So that's what we learned from the data, was that we had a lot of displacement going on in different kinds of neighborhoods. And then we also did a set of case studies with our community-based partners. And in short, we have a number of case studies on our website, which you can read. But this, in short, one of the major punchlines we got from looking at communities around the region was that this is a regional housing market, and we can't really think about communities in isolation because every local housing market is impacting the other ones. And it impacts other housing markets in two ways. It might impact them in sort of chains of displacement. So you have these processes of displacement taking place over decades, where a community is pushed out of one community, and then it goes, the households move to another, and then they move to another. And so you have these displacement chains. And the other way that they're connected is in terms of the market, because you have developers and landowners and speculators who are thinking about where are they going to make a buck, based on dynamics in the whole region. So they are very, for instance, if you're in an inner ring suburb like Concord, which is on a transit line and it's a declining suburb, but if you own a building there, you're very conscious that you're connected by transit to the center. And even if the high income folks don't want to move to your community today or tomorrow, they're going to want to move there in 10 years, 20 years, 25 years. And you're thinking about your return on your investment in terms of that time frame, and you begin displacing your residents in anticipation of that return that's going to come down the road. And this is what we found talking to developers in all different parts of the region. So having done our analysis, we then started digging into policy and started thinking about the anti-displacement policies that exist around the region. And we did a little scorecard. So we have 101 cities in our region. We scored each of them on the 8 major anti-displacement policies in the region, including rent control, including just cause eviction protections, including inclusionary housing, and including a few other types of policies. We graded them. The darker colors are the cities that did pretty well. The lighter colored ones didn't do so well. And actually, our maps were popular, but this analysis went viral because folks looked at it and said, oh my God, the next city over protects its tenants, but ours are getting displaced. What can we do? So at council meetings and so forth, there began to be a lot of discussion about anti-displacement policies and an attempt to do better or try and do as well as some of the leading cities in the region were doing. Mm-hmm. We don't. That's a really good question. No, this is a count. And yeah, no, we would really want to do an evaluation and do some qualitative analysis. And we've done it for certain policies for certain places, but it's very hard to do on this scale. So just to talk a little bit about policies and the universe of policies that we have out there, tools that we could draw from. I put these tools into 3 buckets, and the first has to do with legal tools that really help you intervene building by building, tenant by tenant, that will save a household that's getting evicted, or that will stabilize one building. And then there's the policy level, which is really about city and state actions that can be taken to preserve and produce and protect tenants. And then there's the planning end, and this is actually where my heart is in the 30-year time frame, and I'm thinking about what are the planning tools that we can draw on that will make it possible for our grandchildren to live in this region that we love so much. And that's many of those tools, again, 30-year time frame, those are in the planner's toolkit. So here are the types of policies in each of the buckets. And based on conversations with my hosts, the city of Austin today, I've eliminated some from the bucket already. Why? The ones that are kind of grayed out here are the ones that aren't, or probably aren't legal in the state of Texas. Sorry. Just wait 20 years or something. It'll change. Right, yeah. So again, there's a variety of different tools that we can use, and there hasn't really been enough study evaluating each of these tools to say which gives you the biggest bang for your buck, but we have some evidence of different ones that are working. So inclusionary zoning is a way to increase market rate, affordable housing production with the construction of market rate buildings. It's been shown to have some success in generating units, not a high number of units, and we're talking about thousands of units across the country instead of hundreds of thousands or millions of units. Still, it's a tool. We have some evidence of value recapture, of the use of mechanisms to ensure that when property values go up, especially through public actions, that windfall doesn't just go to the landlords and the property owners, but it gets recaptured for the public good. And tax increment finance is one mechanism we can use, and I just heard Austin is starting or going to start using it. You can use it to fund affordable housing. In California, for years we had a 20% mandate of affordable housing with that mechanism. So that again is a way to do to get some more units built. I'm not going to go through all of these. I want to mention secondary units because that's an area, accessory dwelling units, that I worked on a lot. And there are estimates of the type of potential we could have with a relaxed ADU policy. It's a great way to deal with single-family zoning, to densify gradually through just adding one unit to property. There's been an estimate in the state of California that we could get 600,000 units through ADUs in that state, and Texas is pretty big too, and you got a lot of single-family homes here, so I would guess the potential's in the hundreds of thousands here. So that would be a way to scale up. Okay, so I'm going to move on from this, and we can come back to it in the Q&A if you like. I just want to talk about one other way of thinking about affordable housing strategies, and this is sort of on a continuum between, do you want to generate funds for affordable housing, or do you want to actually build units? And that will, different policies will do different things. Do you want to leverage the market to build units, or do you want to use public taxpayer money to do it? Now, my hosts in the city of Austin were kind enough to edit my slide. So I learned that a number of things that I would propose in many contexts are actually not possible in Texas, and that's everything there on the red side in that, basically in that quadrant. So apparently we don't leverage, in Texas, we don't leverage the market so much, but we rely on public investment, or mostly on this side. But most of these other strategies are possible, and so you can see there's quite a bit there. This could keep you busy for a couple decades. So I want to talk a little bit about the issue of production, housing, developing new housing units, and what that means for displacement. So, and this comes from a policy brief we wrote that's on our website, which looks at this issue of developing market rate units and subsidized units, and looks at how much will that alleviate the pressure on low-income communities that are experiencing this influx of higher income, higher educated residents, as well as influx of capital. If you're in this kind of neighborhood, a gentrifying neighborhood, what happens when a new building comes along? And so that's what we looked at here. And we found that building new market rate housing helps, but it's not enough. It's not going to solve your problems. Just increasing market rate supply doesn't alleviate the housing crisis totally. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And the first reason is that filtering is not going to really work, and it's too slow, basically. So when you expect that the high-end units are going to filter down to be affordable, only 1.5% of them will actually filter every year. So that's not going to have a great effect on rents. It will take 15 years to filter down to moderate income households. It will take 50 years for these units to filter down to low income households. And I think the other point that we haven't really looked at here, and maybe the researchers at UT Austin could look at this, is what happens with filtering when you have the kind of luxury units that are being built right now. And I've seen a few in Austin. And so the product in San Francisco and London and New York and now Austin is really targeting a super rich, super high end. And the filtering theories were about kind of ordinary middle class housing. What happens with filtering when you have luxury condos and a swimming pool and all that? And that study hasn't been done yet. Yeah, well, maybe they would, but we need to look at it. But at any rate, in our research, we found that in the short term, actually, market rate development will increase the rents in the neighborhood. In the very short term, but it does reduce displacement. So there is some sort of mitigating effect of building new supply. So we looked at that effect of market rate development. We said that's great, but what about subsidized development? And how do we understand the difference between the two? So this was our punchline. On top, the picture is subsidized housing. On the bottom is market rate housing. So subsidized housing turns out to be twice as effective as market rate in mitigating displacement and stemming displacement. That's sort of the punchline. But you could also say that doing it through market rate housing has a positive effect in that it doesn't need any subsidy. So we have to pay a lot to build the affordable housing. The market rate doesn't have direct subsidies. Bang for your buck. Again, we really need to look at it and cost it out in more detail. So I just want to wrap up by talking a little bit about our commercial gentrification work, and then we'll go into some talk about impact and then talk about Austin. So this is we complemented our work on residential gentrification with work on commercial gentrification and displacement, and identified the areas that were in particular losing older businesses, particularly owned by communities of color. And so the blue colors here are the ones that gentrified. It was quite a few had gentrified over the 23-year period we were looking at. We've been trying to look at policies to stem the displacement of businesses. And one example is right in our region. We have San Francisco with a new legacy business program which targets businesses that have been around for 30 years or more, and gives them some subsidies to help them stay in the neighborhood. So in terms of impact, so the issue right now is how are we going to change planning and housing policies relevant to displacement on the ground. And we don't, unfortunately, have much action at the federal level on this issue, and in many states, not much action either. So the action is going to be really on the ground, literally at city council meetings. And so this is a picture of a city council meeting in San Jose where this young man brought our maps on his laptop and said, you know, look at this. This neighborhood is at risk, and so you need to enact some policies. So this is the sort of thing, data can really generate a discussion. We had success at the national level. We did get HUD under Obama to change some of its thinking about preference policy for displaced residents. We had the city of San Francisco put in special controls in the Mission District, which require developers to look at displacement maps and do an analysis of displacement when they put in their for their permits for development. We had new targets put in our regional plan targeting anti-displacement goals or stability goals, neighborhood stability. And with that, I want to turn to Austin. And I think most of you will not have seen this map by Professor Wegman and his colleagues at UT Austin. So this is the gentrification risk in the city, a study that will be launched in a month or so, correct? And this will this gives you a sense of the areas, the stages of gentrification that have occurred in this in Austin, and with the clear finding in purple and blue of dynamic and even late stages of gentrification. It's what we call in our maps advanced gentrification. But also of interest, and maybe even of more interest from a policy perspective, is the areas in yellow and brown that are susceptible to gentrification or are in early stages of gentrification, where there's still time to intervene. There's still time to do some of that policy toolkit, which I showed you. So this will hopefully help spark a conversation in the city about neighborhood change and help the city decide, you know, whether you want to make room for your existing residents while accommodating the new folks. The big purple area is what is being characterized as dynamic. So it's in an ongoing process of, let me know if I get this right, but ongoing process of, it has a market that is heating up, basically, and it has vulnerable residents, or actually quite advanced. Probably it's been heating up over more than a decade. Okay. So just to wrap up, we're taking our work national and international. These are our New York maps, which are going to come out. And one of the things about scaling up is you try and make things easier over time if you have to replicate. So we're about to post all of our code online. So your favorite UT student can do it for you if you like. And I just want to note one other kind of outgrowth of this project in the Bay Area has been that Facebook funded us to do a study of housing conditions around the Facebook campus, where there is a lot of speculation and displacement going on. And I wanted to mention this because you guys have an awful lot of tech companies right here. In the Bay Area, we have some initiatives on the ballot for special taxes for tech companies to help fund housing, just like what Amazon and what Seattle just did. We have several cities. There's there's going to be a Google tax on the ballot and so forth. But Facebook is trying to preempt that by being a good citizen and trying to figure out what are its displacement effects in its neighborhood. And so we are working with high school kids in East Palo Alto. And we work with them to kind of map neighborhood change in their neighborhood. And then we're going to be using a urban data science curriculum around housing to kind of get them interested in technology occupations, not just in what's going on in their neighborhood. So this is, I think in the end, we're going to have to get the new generation equipped to do this kind of analysis and to work on policy issues like this. So that's what we do. We try and make a difference through data. And that's it for my talk, and now I'd love to have a discussion more about Austin. Thank you. Do you want to moderate? Oh, I'll just go ahead. Your hand was up first, sir, in the back, so we will.
Person, please. Thank you.
You had a startling piece of data early on in your talk where you said that your plans for population growth in the next 20 or 50 years or whatever is to put 80% of the population growth into 5% of the land area. Austin is a sprawling, suburban, I guess San Francisco is not so much, but I think we are trying to get 50% and let it go to the suburbs and get 50% in the city. Are we setting our goals too loose?
What an interesting question. And that's at the regional level, the regional plan, or yeah. I think context matters a lot, and the fact that you don't have a transit system here, that really, I mean, you have a start of one, but I don't know if you, I think it would be very challenging from a transportation perspective to go more than 50%. That said, everything is about to change in terms of transportation. I mean, everything. I just wrote a paper on electric vehicles. In my spare time, I'm really interested in technology. And we're going to have 50 million new electric vehicles in the world per year by 2040 or 2035. So it's going to be something like 35% of all demands. And then the autonomous vehicles is going to happen at the same time. And there are very different forecasts about what that means for urban form, because for some it means that there's going to be more sprawl, because you have your car drive you home, and now you can just work in your car, so you can do a 2-hour commute each way. That'll be for some, but for others, when you're thinking about transit going through autonomous cars that are now helping you bring your kid to school and to go to daycare and to shopping, and instead of having 4 bus trips, you have your autonomous car you take from place to place. That's going to allow actually more density. So you should think about adjusting your goals in Austin.
So, hold on, we're doing, and then we'll do another, I'll do 3, and then I'll do 3 and 3.
Hello, thank you so much for being here today, and love the way you started off just talking about how, the goals of reducing our carbon emissions and to be a more walkable society. Our land development code, or our comprehensive plan, talks about being a compact and connected city. And neither of us right here have a car, and so many of my friends don't want a car and love to get rid of their car. But we do a really good job in Austin of making housing very, very difficult, especially market rate housing. We do almost everything we can to, make housing less and less efficient in Austin. And so, with that kind of conversation coming from kind of predominantly older, predominantly wealthier, whiter, central city, single-family homeowners, knocking down density and transit, how are ways that we can get through that as a community and just be better for all of us, for our future, and just getting more homes and affordability on the ground?
This is a huge question everywhere in the country, and in the Bay Area is just like Austin. Just a huge divide between the millennials. I'm assuming you are millennials. Or close, who haven't been able to buy property, and certainly haven't been able to live in the most livable and walkable areas of the region, and then the older folks that have. And in the Bay Area, when this comes up, I often say to the older folks, how far do you want to drive to visit your grandchildren? Because if you don't let that that development, that multifamily development go up around the corner from you, it's in the long run, you're not going to be able to, to house your family affordably close by to you. I think that, so the age, that the grandchild factor is one thing, and the demography is going to change everything. So, another 10 years or so, the older generation will be less influential in political spheres, and then what happens is people start. We're seeing this in the Bay Area as the older folks age out. The new folks that come into those neighborhoods are more and more high income, and people some older folks begin to sort of change their mind gradually about diversity in that context. Yeah. So there's more on this topic, but we can come back to it if others want.
Yes, ma'am. I'm a recreation therapist, so I'm very glad to see that you have this outreach to young people, because one of the great anxieties that a lot of our young people in this city have is displacement. They express that anxiety that all the people they grew up with They're not there. They're graduating, and all the people they grew up with and went to school with aren't there graduating with them, and they don't know whether they're going to continue to live in their neighborhood anymore, and they don't know what their future's like. So I think that's a wonderful thing that you have included them there. That's great. Also, oh, you going to say something? Go ahead.
No, is there a
I have more to say. No,
Okay.
I have more to say. Also, 12 years ago when I was working at Austin State Hospital, I rented a small house. It was very small, but it was in Rosedale, which is in the neighborhood right next to the Austin State Hospital in central Austin. It's a very wealthy neighborhood. I rented it for $685 a month. Today, I'm in a boarding house. I pay $650 for a room with a bathroom. And that's really what I want to ask you about, because I'm on disability, and I found it impossible to navigate the system to get assisted housing for a person with disability. I ran up against every wall you can imagine and couldn't decipher how to do it. And I'm a person with a college degree and graduate courses in many things. And that's why there are people with mental health issues on our streets, because they don't know how to do it. They don't have the endurance, they don't have the stamina, and they frankly don't have the intellectual capability. So can you comment on how we can institute policies and follow through on those policies that'll help those people get into housing? Because you said before it doesn't work to start from the top down. I really believe it has to work from the bottom up.
Yeah, that's your comment raises so many issues, and you know what? So our systems for allocating affordable housing, the little bit of subsidized housing that we actually have, you know, our systems are incredibly outdated, and it's, you know, different cities are enacting different ways of helping people figure out where the resources are. New York City has been a leader in this. It has an app that helps connect people to public housing, and it's connected. It's opened up its data systems between agencies so that they speak to each other. So the agency dealing with disabilities will have data shared with the housing agency, and then you know who is in need, and so a lot of it is that sort of issue. Very serious, but actually technological problems that could be solved. But still, there's not going to be enough resources, first of all, and secondly, there's not. Our programs are too narrowly targeted at this point, when the housing need has grown tremendously across different groups, really crawling up through the middle class, and all kinds of disability and so forth. And we haven't actually even really started to design housing policies and programs for all those that are in need now because of our huge and growing income inequality in this country.
Okay, I'm gonna, this one, and I'll go to you third.
I'm curious, have you looked at the major factor in gentrification or displacement in Austin, that's the raising property taxes, in the relative to your study, how much of our local government is funded by property taxes versus other communities that may have other revenue sources?
So the issue being that cities are encouraging this in order to get property taxes.
I think it's a result.
Or getting more.
What you
Yeah.
propose in another city may not be appropriate for Austin because we have such a high dependency on
Yes.
property taxes.
Right, that's right. And so, yeah, so this, in some areas, they call this the fiscalization of land use, so where cities are really relying on taxes. And in some areas, it's about malls, but other areas, it's about the property tax. And yes, you would need to have some sort of property tax reform or special property tax treatment. And there's actually a great paper on this by Heather Way. Heather Way in the UT Law School wrote a great paper on 8 or 9 different policies that could be used to address this problem of the property tax that's and the increases that are occurring with gentrification and then the displacement because of the property tax. So there's a number of different mechanisms. Some of them are legal in Texas. And hopefully you guys will start to work on that. It's been done in places like New Jersey and others that have had to deal with it for a long time.
Thank you. I was wondering about your conclusion that market rate units increase rents but does reduce displacement, and then that further that subsidized housing is twice as effective. Before we generalize that to apply everywhere, I wanted to know, where was that study, where was the data coming from, and could we generalize that, or is it possibly different depending on so where's the data from?
Yeah, so no, this is a great question. And so I'm an urban planner, not an economist, although I like doing economics work. So I believe that it's going to be very different in different places. The amount of the displacement effect and the amount of the rent decrease or increase that occurs is going to be variable in different contexts. So one of the things that I would love to do with my UT Austin collaborators is a comparative study of Austin, because it should come out the same as San Francisco, at least. It's very similar economies and issues, but I think the devil's in the details, and you go neighborhood by neighborhood, and you may find something very different. So this is an area of more research.
I heard you mention one tool that I'm not familiar with. I think you called it preference policies, and the impression I got was that they are to put preference on residents that have some history in the area and in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
so I'm curious about that.
Also, if you want to Google it, it's either anti-displacement preference or also called right to return.
Okay.
Policies, and Portland has it in some form. Chicago and Seattle are looking at it, and it's basically saying trying to understand historic patterns of gentrification and displacement in a city, and saying if you have if you are from a neighborhood where there's been a lot of displacement, we're going to give you a right to return. We're going to put you higher up on the list for federally funded affordable housing. And in some places, it's not, well, in San Francisco, it's using our maps and our typology of gentrification and displacement. In other cities, it's about urban renewal, specifically. It's saying, boy, if you're from a neighborhood that was ravaged by urban renewal in the 60s or 70s or 80s, you need to have the right to return. So that's the Portland one.
Raise your hands. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. So you're the first one, because you're closer. Oh, thank you.
Thank you for speaking. You mentioned a bunch of options in legal policy and the long-term planning. If City Council came to you and said, you know, we generally want to accommodate all the demand and all the people that want to live in Austin, but we also want to make the local residents better off, from all the things that you offered, what would be 2 or 3 things that you would recommend that you must do?
So I think you have to do value capture right now. You have to get mechanisms in place that preserve some of that increase in land values for the public good. And there's a number of different ways you can do that, but I think that's really critical because once the land is gone, it's over. There is no game anymore. So, and the Guadeloupe case is really instructive, right? Where you have a land trust that went and bought lots of land, and now, and, too bad they didn't buy the whole neighborhood. So, right? So that, so that's another issue is purchasing land and thinking about and using Professor Wegman's maps to figure out where you want strategically to purchase land, because you don't want to purchase it at market, the highest end. You want to find the best where you can get the biggest bang for your buck. And then and then the housing bond is the third thing that I think is really important. So value capture, land, buying land, and then using some of the housing bond money for housing preservation, for the preservation of affordable units. And so this is what we've done with some success in San Francisco and Oakland, which both passed housing bonds for $500 million and more. And those bonds, a good chunk of those bonds have gone towards buying buildings that are currently owned by private sector landlords and putting them into permanent affordability and moving them into public ownership. And so getting a fair number of units that way, and it's cheaper. We've looked at the cost, and it's cheaper to preserve units than to build new, so you're getting more out of it. You have to realize if you don't do that, again, eventually those units are likely to filter up and be lost. So be proactive and preserve those buildings now while you can.
I called on you too, right?
Hi, thanks for coming. I'm interested in the long-term planning for gentrification, like the 20, 30-year vision planning. And for example, say I'm interested in talking to Google and Apple and a lot of these major corporations that use our culture to recruit people from all over the world, basically, to move here and who don't really understand our culture. And then a lot of this displacement happens. Is there any such study as good gentrification where we can harness the natural influx of income and revenue and market to make gentrification more of a positive experience for everybody? Is there such a thing as that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think whenever capital is coming into a community, it ought to be an opportunity, right? And so then you just need the institutional structure to make sure it goes for the public good and not just for windfall gains for that private sector. So, and there are examples of where this has happened. I mean, the ones, some of them are quite limited, I think. I mean, like community benefits agreements, which are done building by building, and then you get some limited benefits, like at the Staples Center in LA, you get some limited benefits for the residents around the stadium. But I think we need to think more systematically and systemically about how to recapture that. And that's why I support Seattle and the tech tax. Now, can you do that in this? No.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Not for affordable housing. Okay. So if you can't do it for housing, can you do it for other things that will benefit the community? Because if you could do it for schools, for instance, then you can start to educate your disadvantaged youth and get them into higher tech jobs so that they can then afford to stay, right? So I mean, there are lots of other we ought to be focusing on incomes really just as much as housing in this game, and maybe Texas wouldn't mind that. Getting kids into tech jobs, So.
As someone who had windfall profits when I sold my house and it funded my retirement, I don't think profit's necessarily a nasty thing. And also as an old white person who agrees with him. We absolutely need densification, but my question is, how do you densify without displacing anybody? I mean, it sounds like a contradiction. Somebody's going to have to be moved out to build this modern housing like this young man wants. Can you give us an example of some place where you've frozen a neighborhood in amber and it's worked successfully? And how do we densify without moving people out?
Okay. So I just want to quickly say something about windfall profits. So there, people that have done their time in the neighborhood and given to it and been long-term homeowners, I think they have earned their windfall profit. So yes, and you can take it. And I think, in San Francisco, the city tried to make a distinction and really and make sure we don't tax people like you, but tax speculators. And there was a speculator tax on the ballot that didn't pass, but that's the approach that a few other cities have taken. So that you need to really target to make it politically palatable and fair. So density without displacement. So here's the deal. So if you don't densify, there will be a lot of displacement. If you do densify, there will be some displacement. So it's really all a matter of scale, right? So if you don't densify, then all that pressure from all those immigrants into the region, mostly tech workers, also some others, all that pressure will go on to the existing stock. Right, because there won't be a place for them to live. So you have to. That growth is going to come. We can't freeze growth. Not in the great state of Texas in particular, and the great state of California. Two vibrant economies. You're not going to be able to stop them and freeze them in amber. Right. So the growth is going to come. If you don't build for them, you're going to have that pressure on existing residents and displacement. So you have to build some. But then when you do build, you're going to need to put anti-displacement policies in place so that you don't, because development can be catalytic and change the character of the neighborhood and transform and sort of set in place a process of displacement, of transformation that you need to put policies in place to guard against.
1, 2, 3.
More hands every time.
I don't know if they gave you context before you came here, so from 1970 to 1990, according to HUD, we were the most affordable city in the United States when you compared median income to median rent or mortgage. And now we're heading towards your end of the continuum, I think you accurately said. And you've also accurately said that the context in which we operate in Texas is so different that we have many limitations that other communities don't. So I'm asking you a question about replicability, given the fact that we will no longer be able to annex generally, which has been our pattern for affordability, because the ledge took that away, and they took away a number of tools that you outlined. So as we have a community conversation about how do we make it easier for those who want to remain and return to do so, as well as easier for those who are coming to do so as well, isn't that a different conversation than the Bay Area, which was always way more expensive than we were for a long, long time?
Right. No. So this is a fair question, and so here's the deal. So your affordability crisis is how long? It's been 10 years or something.
We did gentrification reports beginning in 2000. We knew
2000. Okay, so we'll date it back almost 20 years. So yeah, that's right. In the first tech boom, I remember that. That's when Austin started. Yeah. So so the Bay Area's affordability crisis started 20 years before that. So this region's sort of like the Bay Area in 1988. Say, or 1985, right? And so there's a process that happens when you first get acquainted with your affordability crisis, right? You have to really take in that it's not like it used to be, that your kids can no longer buy in the area. And I think that realization in the Bay Area it took really a decade for people to figure out, wow, this is we're getting priced out, and the middle class is leaving, and so that it's going to take time, and I think you're at the beginning of a wonderful learning curve and community organizing time, which will, I think, result in some innovative types of policies here. You got to believe. So, I mean, the Bay Area, my favorite stat on housing in the Bay Area is that the city of San Francisco, half of the units are rent protected in some form. Either they're land trust or public housing or under rent stabilization or rent control, half of the units. So that's a huge success story, because that city should be completely gentrified. It should be all like central London by now, but it's not. It's diverse. And how did that happen? Through policy. Policy made it work. Policy has stopped the gentrification of New York. Yes, New York is gentrified, and forget about, the Village and Brooklyn Heights and whatever, but still, it's incredibly diverse, and there's huge amounts of subsidized housing in New York, and what has been preserved in New York is through policy, through really concerted policies. Now, New York had a huge head start on Austin. New York started in the 1880s. So, you guys are going to do it even quicker. That it's not going to take you 100 years to figure it out, right?
So I've heard a lot about housing preservation and production and gentrification and displacement, and I haven't really heard a lot about the commercial studies. And I'm wondering if there is if you have any insights over the overlap between the commercial and residential gentrification and maybe preservation and production policies and tools that kind of look at those two things together, if there are any possibility of those being considered together.
So we've looked at those together. We call it the chicken and egg question. So does residential gentrification cause commercial? Does commercial cause residential? Actually, our study, which I showed you the maps from, finds the opposite in Los Angeles from the Bay Area. So in the Bay Area, residential happens first and then commercial, and then in LA, it was actually the commercial that started it and then the residential. So my guess is Austin is more like the Bay Area than LA, but you'd have to look at it. So, yeah, the commercial gentrification is just much, much harder from a policy perspective to deal with, because nobody has commercial rent control. So, and in fact, there's very little even data on commercial leases, so we don't even know how much people are paying and when their leases are up, so when they're going to go. And then even more than that, business churn is completely normal. So, the average length of a restaurant that it lasts in New York City is 6 months. So, and I bet it's getting pretty short here too in some areas, right? So business churn is going to happen, and it's very hard to make a political argument that you should stabilize that. It's much harder. There's not so much of a clear equity or justice issue as there is with residential. So hard to coordinate.
Well, I have a problem. I've lived two places here in Austin. The place where I grew up was a block off of Chacon on 12th Street. If I had the opportunity to go back there, I would not, because it's not the neighborhood. Nobody is there that I would know. It's not the neighborhood. I would stay where I am.
Right.
To the other thing, I would not buy another home in Austin, because to me, there's, you know, I don't like living shoulder to shoulder with my neighbors. I like a backyard I can go sit in, or a front yard I can sit in. And the idea of having the small little compact does not suit me. My son lives in Hutto, where he could buy a house with a yard and his kids and dogs could run around in the yard and everything. So there's always that segment. As far as Austin's transportation or lack thereof, I bought 5 cars because of it. Would continue to do so because it doesn't have a transportation system. I don't know what the solution would be to the problem. It seems like the transit is trying to discourage riders more so than encourage them. And the tax structure is such that I don't know anybody, if they wanted to go back into the area where I grew up, I don't know anybody who could afford it or who would want to.
Yeah, no, these are really good points, and I mean, some of these areas have changed so much, and that they're not recognizable. There is no community left to speak of, and then this issue of, you know, a lot of people didn't really want to stay in the city, and you know, it really wasn't all like people running away to the suburbs, right? I mean, even today, 60% of households want to live in the suburbs. Only 40% even want to live in the central areas of the region. So, so the issue though that has been pointed out is that we didn't actually ever. Well, two things. We haven't really trained the market to build affordable housing in the core of the city. So the market doesn't really know how. We've sort of incentivized it to go out and build way out in the middle of nowhere, build on greenfield land, and we've provided roads and tax incentives and mortgage interest deduction and so forth to make that happen. And so we haven't built enough, or we haven't even developed a culture really of building affordable housing in the core of the region. So, you know, for instance, we used to have fourplexes being built in places. We don't even have that building type anymore in some regions. And so we don't yet. So there's not this possibility for the people that want to stay to be able to stay. So.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being here this evening. Can you talk about the interplay of race and displacement? And in general, at least anecdotally from my perspective, even if we're looking here at Austin, yes, there were some folks of color in East Austin who moved to get better housing stock when the houses started to deteriorate, or better schooling, et cetera. But there seems to be a pattern, whether it's here or in other urban areas, where the indigenous people, blacks, Hispanics, don't get a chance to benefit from the increase in the property values that you talk about, the good part of gentrification. Right. They just get the back end of the stick, the displacement. And can we talk about the intentionality that goes along with that and the institutional barriers and systemic inequities that are entrenched in that whole process?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a huge issue. So I mean, this is a country that was built on displacement, right? We displaced the indigenous populations when they came, and we said, hey, this this isn't your land, this can be English land now. And so that kind of culture of basically appropriating land without restitution is embedded in many of our in our legal system and in our in our property rights system and in our institutions and so forth. So it's very hard to kind of unpack the layers of structuralized racism that are really that's driving disproportionate displacement in different communities. And so, and one of the issues is that it is very different in different regions, and it plays out differently with different ethnic groups and so forth. So it's complicated. I think that the best solutions I've seen coming on this issue are by John Powell, who's my colleague at Berkeley, who writes about targeted universalism, and which is really about making sure that we don't just try and make it all equal, make it, you all get access to kindergarten, but rather let's look all at the deeper history of individual groups and make sure that even before you get access to kindergarten, you have a equal opportunity and compensation for historic disadvantage that is affecting you even if you have the same educational rights as everybody else. So that said, I think many different cities are having a really good conversation about race right now, and I don't know if you guys have the racial equity conversation going on in Austin to the extent that Seattle has been a leader in this. The Twin Cities Minneapolis has been very strong in this issue. Portland is now having it. Oakland is now having it. There's a set of cities that are working on increasing this consciousness throughout all the policies, because you can take every city policy and unpack the racial bias that is there, and then that will affect displacement. You said you're working
Okay,
on it?
I have time for one more question, and then we're out of here. And this lady's been raising her hand. I'm sorry I couldn't get everybody. I'll try to do my best. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I live in a community where we can't afford a lot of these ADUs or home equity loans or. And we are seeing people coming in and my neighbors going out. And I did speak to one developer, which he sold the house in front of me. And he said that he was the cause of me being displaced. And he's right. But is there anything that the owners, the ones that have been there, because we have made so many changes in our community, and we're the ones that are being gentrified, kicked out. So what can I do? Because apparently, density is a major thing, what's going on, but nobody sees the low income. Everybody talks about the middle income. Well, we're not middle income, and we cannot afford none of that. Home equity loans, we're always late with our rent or with our mortgage, so we can't afford that. 2 months and our house is not ours. And ADUs, I have a big backyard and I like it. Like the way she was saying, I have peach trees, pomegranates, figs, pears. I have all these things in the back of my yard. That's my sanctuary. That's where I go and I distress from, the outside world. And I would like to stay there. And also, if I'm displaced, I don't have a degree and I don't have a major or, you know, so if I go to a little town, I could be a community health worker or I could be a community organizer. There's nothing to organize in a little town. So my future is not very, you know, like I don't have a future somewhere else if it's not in Austin or if it's not in a big city. And I can't afford it probably in about 10 years. I won't be able to afford it the way it's going because the taxes are increasing yearly considerably. And my boss doesn't want to pay me enough to afford the taxes. And I don't blame her, but you know, it's not her fault. But you know, this is what is going on in my community. We live in the Southeast Crescent, and a lot of the people from the Eastern Crescent are being gentrified because of all these issues. And I don't think that's fair because, you know, we have been there for years and we built this community. We built all of these changes in our community. And I do remember somebody in one of the meetings that said, well, Francis, this is your fault because you have made those changes. And he's right. You know, we have been advocating for sidewalks, for parks, for better connectivity to the schools, for safe routes, for all of these beautiful changes that now has made it safer and now has made it more beautiful for people to come and live over here, which about 10 or 15 years ago, there was people talking about not even getting into Stastny because they were going to be killed. That was what they thought about my community. And now everybody wants it. Not everybody, but you know, it's something that it is very real to us. So, you know, what can I do?
Yeah, you know, it's one of the saddest things that when communities all over the country have put their sweat and equity into improving the neighborhood, and the gain is you know, it's erased immediately as people come in seeking a profit and get attracted to the area. So I guess, I mean, first of all, I think it sounds like Austin really needs to do something about that property tax issue. That should be number one. And looking at the low-income households all through the city and how that could help stabilize the community. You know, a lot of people would say, you know, you got your windfall profit. You can make a lot of money by leaving, and it's just not true, right? So because you will lose a lot by leaving. So you'll get all that money, and then you'll lose everything else. So that's a devil's bargain. So one of the things we really need to work on is getting the home equity loan, finding financial institutions, and maybe it's credit unions. And we've seen some credit unions open up to help high equity, low income homeowners. You know, draw on some of that equity. It's just a set of new products. I don't know if anybody is doing this locally. In the Bay Area, there's an organization, it's actually for-profit startup called Point.com, which is entering this space and specializing really in elderly homeowners who have very low income but high equity and want to stay. So, you know, I'm hoping we start to develop the type of financial instruments that could help you stay.
Well, Karen, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for all the great questions. Thank you so much. And please fill out your survey. And I hope you attend our next Imagine Austin Speaker Series, which is on August 1st. It's on building community resilience. Thank you again for coming. Thank you again, Karen.